Once upon a time, in a faraway land, nestled between emerald hills and golden sands, there lived a man named Kakafoni. He was no ordinary man, he was a gifted musician, a man whose voice could calm storms and whose melodies could heal a broken heart. But beyond his fame and fortune, there was one thing Kakafoni cherished more than anything in the world, his wife, Adamma. Adamma was his muse, his heart, the rhythm behind every note he played. He sang for her every morning as the sun kissed the earth, and every evening as the stars blinked into view. To the world, Kakafoni was a legend. But to Adamma, he was simply her husband, the man who made her smile with songs no one else would ever hear. But as with all tales, peace does not last forever. One day, Kakafoni was invited to perform in a distant land. It was to be his longest tour yet, weeks of traveling across deserts, through forests, singing before kings and queens. He held Adamma close before he left, promising to return soon. But fate had other plans. While crossing the Great Ramu Desert, Kakafoni and his crew were swallowed by a violent sandstorm. The wind screamed louder than his voice could sing, and when it finally ended, they were lost, trapped in the desert's belly with no way out. Back home, Adamma waited. Days turned to weeks, and weeks into months. She searched, pleaded, prayed, but no news came. Her heart grew heavy. She refused to believe he was gone. But the pain was unrelenting. Like a candle fighting the wind, her body weakened, and then, one quiet night, Adamma closed her eyes, and never opened them again. By the time Kakafoni stumbled out of the desert, skin burned and voice cracked, he rushed home, only to find a cold grave waiting for him. His world shattered. He stopped singing. The once cheerful melody of his life became silence. His house grew dusty, his hair turned gray. The villagers begged him to sing again, they needed his voice, his hope, but he was a shadow, barely alive. Until one evening, while wandering the edge of the forest, he met a woman. Old. Wrinkled. Eyes like two tiny lanterns of mischief. "I know who you are," she said with a toothless grin. "I've danced to your music for years. But now, your heart is broken." Kakafoni nodded. "I can help you," she whispered. "I know the way to the land of the living dead. You can see her again. You can bring her back. But, it comes with a price." He looked up. "Anything. I'll do anything. You must give me 2 of your fingers," she said, "and follow my instructions exactly. If you fail, you will lose what is most precious to you, both living and dead." He didn't hesitate. He stretched his hand. The ritual was done. A strange wind blew. His fingers turned to dust. And the ground beneath him opened. He fell into nothingness. It felt like falling through centuries. Cold wind slapped his face. Whispered voices curled around his ears, some sobbing, some laughing, some whispering his name. Then, thud. Kakafoni landed in a strange world. The sky above was red and swirling. Trees had no leaves, just bones for branches. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat. Shadows moved, but they had no bodies. This was not a place for the living. He staggered forward, and that's when they found him. 3 pale creatures, taller than any man, with eyes like boiling milk and arms that dragged across the ground. They moved like smoke. Their mouths were sideways, stretching from ear to ear. And when they spoke, "A living one," they hissed. Before he could run, they pounced. Their claws sliced into his clothes. He was dragged, through thorns, across rivers of oil, through a field of teeth poking out from the earth. His heart pounded. His voice wanted to scream, but fear had frozen it. They threw him at the feet of the great bone gates, tall as the sky, carved with names of the forgotten. The gates creaked open. Spirits hovered. Children with skull faces giggled. Women with hollow eyes stared. A man with a snake for a spine hissed softly as Kakafoni was dragged through. Then came the village of the dead, Ulayuba. The entire land paused when he was dropped in the village square. A large throne, made from the ribcage of a giant beast, stood at the center. And upon it sat the Bone King, his face made of ash, his crown forged from fireflies trapped in ice. "Who dares walk among the dead?" The king's voice echoed like thunder rolling through a graveyard. "You breathe, you bleed. You are not one of us." The crowd roared. "Tear him apart. Drain him. Feed him to the silence." Kakafoni fell to his knees. "I came for love," he whispered. "Love," the king spat. "A foolish reason to die." They raised their hands, preparing to strike. "That's when it happened," he sang. At first, his voice trembled. But then it rose. Strong. Pure. A melody of longing. A song of a man broken, of nights waiting for answers, of hope buried beneath grief. He poured it all out. The land went still. Spirits wept. The trees stopped pulsing. Even the wind held its breath. And the Bone King began to cry. "That song," he murmured. "That was my wife's favorite, before she became dust." He stood slowly. "You have moved the dead." He descended from his throne and placed a skeletal hand on Kakafoni's shoulder. "You will not die today, singer. You have brought music to a place ruled by silence." The crowd cheered. For the first time in centuries, they danced. Children spun in circles. Old ghosts clapped. Flames danced above their heads. They kept him there. For days. He was treated like royalty. Fed from golden bowls filled with memory fruit and laughter wine. The Bone King told him ancient secrets. Spirits sang with him. But Kakafoni could not rest. "I came for Adamma," he said one evening. The Bone King sighed. "She rests here, among us. I will let you see her." And then, she came. Adamma. More radiant than the day he left. She ran to him, and they wept in each other's arms. "I found you," he said. "I've come to take you home." The king watched them, quiet. Then he said, "Because you brought joy to the dead, you may return with her. But there is one rule: as you leave, do not look back. No matter what. If you look back, she stays. Forever." Kakafoni nodded. The entire village of the dead gathered that morning. They sang. They played drums made from the bark of silent trees. The spirits danced around him and Adamma. It was a festival, a celebration unlike any seen in the land of the living or the dead. Kakafoni's heart was full. Adamma danced beside him. She laughed like old times. They moved together toward the glowing bridge that stretched from the dead to the living. The villagers followed behind, still singing his name. Kakafoni, in the voice of the living. Kakafoni, who made the dead dance. But as they walked, the singing grew faint. The laughter dimmed. And then, silence. Kakafoni frowned. His heart skipped. He could no longer hear Adamma's footsteps behind him. He paused. then remembered the warning. He shook his head. Keep going, he whispered to himself. Don't look back. But the silence grew heavier, darker. Adamma, he said. Are you there? No answer. His hands trembled. The edge of the breach was near. Just a few more steps. But he couldn't take it. He turned. She was standing there, eyes wide. No, she whispered. Why did you look? Her skin began to crack. Light poured from her body like sand seeping through fingers. He ran to her. But she was fading. I waited for you, and you looked. She reached for him one last time. Then, she was gone. The spirits vanished. The breach cracked beneath his feet. He collapsed to the ground, screaming. When he awoke, he was back. In the world of the living. Alone. A voice behind him said, I warned you. It was the old woman again. You have lost her. Forever. And now, the most precious thing in this world, your voice, is mine. He opened his mouth. Nothing. No song. No cry. Not even a whisper. And from that day, Kakafoni never sang again. But when the wind blows at night, and the stars are quiet, some say they still hear it, a soft melody carried across worlds. The song of a man who went too far for love. And to this day, when the wind sings through the trees, people say they hear Kakafoni's last song, carried by the spirits, still searching for his Adamma. And that is the story my father told me. A tale of love, of loss, of breaking the one rule that could have saved everything. So, if you ever hear a melody in your dreams, soft and sorrowful, don't follow it. Don't look back.